And now with this year, with all of the trade actions that we've had, we have more different special tariff programs with their own tariff codes coming into play, where you have more lines than you had to have before to describe a single item that has all these different duty rates. And so that's why then CBP had recently had to do this increase of the maximum number of HTS codes per line in an entry.
Hey, folks, we're on for a great show with Simply Trade Podcast, and we've got a lot of things going on. I tell you, it's the subjects have been coming at us from several different angles, Lilo, and it's an exciting time, if you will, whether you like it or not. I mean, there's just lots of energy, lots of discussion, a lot of frustration, a lot of stress, different things going on with the U.S. and trade talks with different countries around the world. And we're going to get into some of this in a good discussion, I think. Lila Landis, she is well respected in the industry. She's worked for importers, she's worked for exporters, she's worked for service providers. She's trained. She's one of the sharpest tools in the shed, as I would say, if I can even say. I'm having a hard time today. Doggone it. Lila, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys, for having me back on.
Thank you, Lila. Thanks. You're always a sport, and endure the 30 or 40 minutes of sitting here and talking to us. But thank you so much for that.
I wouldn't say endure. I would be a lot kinder than that. I'm always happy to talk trade.
Well, it's like, my intellect sometimes just doesn't make it all the way up as far as on an elevator here. So it's like,
I tell you what, there's some of these trade regulations and changes going on that challenge me, where I'm just like 38 different tariff code lines on a single entry. Oh my God, that's a nightmare.
That scares me to death. And I still question the rationale behind that. I think that there's some people that are novices in international trade trying to get some information or whatever. And it's the more you have, the less accurate I think things will become, because it'll be just a nightmare on trying to get it classified.
Yeah. I mean, overall, kind of like business abhors uncertainty and ambiguity, right? Those are things that are kind of antithetical to being able to run a business efficiently. And that's kind of the hallmark of what's going on right now in trade and with trade policy, is that there's so much that's changing. There's so much that's uncertain. You have a tweet about a change in trade policy, but then you have an executive order, and it may or may not match the terms of what was said in the tweet. And then maybe you have the Federal Register change, and then you have a CSMS message, and you're trying to track it from one place to the next and figuring out, only to find out, that's put on hold for 90 days, and it's back on, it's off again. It's just so difficult for trade compliance people and for businesses themselves to operate in that environment when they don't know what's happening from one week to the next.
Just for our listeners, since we've mentioned it, we were talking about the 38-digit classification. Give a synopsis, Lila, of somebody that's out there going, we're talking about the harmonized tariff code system, obviously, for classifying commodities on an entry. But just mention or give a nutshell so somebody understands going, I don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah. Well, not digits.
So you have
38 lines, right?
Yeah, I think that's what the maximum was recently increased to, that it went up to 38. So typically, when you're importing a product, you need a harmonized tariff classification, which is a numbering system that tells customs more specifically what it is, because you might call it, widget 3000 version 2, CMMC 2357, right? Maybe that's your internal nomenclature, but it's going to be something that's nonsensical from customs perspective. And so the numbering system gives them a more standard description of what it is. oh, okay, this is a women's short sleeve dress that's 100% cotton, right? Like something that they can understand the basics of what it is. And so ordinarily on a very uncomplicated, simple entry, you might have just one single HTS code telling you what that is, and it has a duty rate assigned to it. And you have the HTS plus country of origin that gets you your duty rate, and you go about your day. And then you have additional lines, additional harmonized tariff codes that come into play when there's special things involved. Things like maybe you're doing U.S. goods returned where you'd already previously exported this before and you're going to use a Chapter 98 version. Or perhaps there are some other special trade programs that you're going to utilize. And then we have extra tariff programs where they carry their own HTS. So if it's subject to Section 301 duties, there's a special 99 tariff code that you're going to have in addition to that. And now with this year, with all of the trade actions that we've had, we have more different special tariff programs with their own tariff codes coming into play, where you have more lines than you had to have before to describe a single item that has all these different duty rates. So you might have something that has its basic HTS code describing what it is, and then you have a Chapter 99 code for Section 301, and you have another code that's for Section 232, and you have another code that's for being a derivative, and you have a code for this and a code for that and for fentanyl. And so that's why then CBP recently had to do this increase of the maximum number of HTS codes per line in an entry, is because this has exploded as we've had all these new special tariff programs that have been implemented.
I was saying digits. I didn't mean that. I mean, I meant the additional lines. So it gives your primary classification and then all the additional, if you will, characteristics of that line. It was U.S. goods being sent out. Now it's coming back in. It's just like you said, the additional duties and the reciprocal duties or whatever, 301s, 232s, all these other special things and all that. Man, I tell you, can you imagine the programming that's going on right now with the brokerage systems out there and all that? And Lalo and I had a conversation I think it was yesterday, Lalo, or maybe the day before, and we were talking with all the things you just said. There'll be a tweet or a Truth Social post, and then the Federal Registry, and it doesn't match up necessarily. And then there's supplemental information on it. Can you imagine, as frustrated as people are, how hard the people in CBP are working to get information out and trying their best to get it clear? And they're still challenged in that. And in addition, the other agencies, and they're involved in this and trying to figure it all out. So folks, as frustrated as you may get with all these changes, and they're changing by the minute sometimes, please keep in mind that the people that are producing this are doing the best they can, and don't get too frustrated with it, because they're trying their best to get it out. So I salute the folks in the administration for CBP and the other agencies. So
the things that I've been telling importers is to try to have a lot of grace and compassion for your brokers right now, the customs brokers that you're working with, because they are in the same boat where they're just following things as they're getting announced. They're working with their software providers, wondering when the system's going to be updated to accommodate the latest change. They're working on their processes. They're trying to keep up with everything. And they're working in this new environment where everyone's having to learn on the fly, right? Because there's so many changes happening so fast that it's a really difficult environment for the brokers to work in as well. And then they have to deal with things like, when the CIT court ruling came down and said that, IEEPA was not an appropriate vehicle to be able to use to implement the additional tariffs, then there was an immediate reaction from the import community inundating with the brokers with messages saying, where's my refund? That if the IEEPA tariffs are illegal, then, I want to know how fast I'm getting the refund on my duties. And it's like, well, pump the brakes. brakes, guys. Like it doesn't happen that way, right? That's just one court ruling. It's got to go through the Court of Appeals. It's likely going to go to the Supreme Court. Even then, you have to have CBP actually make changes and have a process for how you're going to get refunds. And so it's a much longer thing. But this is all something that the brokers are having to deal with and get updates at the same time as the rest of us.
Interesting how that went down. Also, I guess Lila did that. At one point, they said that CBP or the government needs to stop collecting IEPA tariffs, but almost immediately another court came back and said, no, keep it in. Because I guess the logic, if I'm not mistaken, is might as well collect them, because you can't go back and collect them if the government is right. You cannot just necessarily go back and collect back duties, whereas if the government is wrong, it's you can actually refund that. I mean, and I think that those were the logic.
Yeah, when the court's evaluating whether to put a ruling on hold, to stay the ruling while it goes through an appeals process, they're going to look at different factors. And one of those is the harm that's caused by each party, right? So what is the harm that's caused to the importers versus what is the harm that's caused to the government? There's always going to be some more deference to the government just because that's natural within a court system. And so then it's not really surprising that they put that ruling on hold, that they stayed the ruling while it went through the appeals process. That doesn't necessarily mean that they don't believe that ultimately the ruling will stand, that it will be upheld, but more so that if they already are going to have to refund duties to importers if the ruling's upheld anyway, that it made more sense to keep the process in place for right now and then just have, a final decision at the end of the appeals process where then you have a final date of this is when you stop collecting those tariffs and you begin a refund process.
Can you tell that Lila is studying to be an attorney?
I am no trade attorney yet, but I am greatly enjoying using my law school studies to be able to apply to this. I was really excited when that when the opinion came down from the CIT. It was really exciting because then I pulled it up and it's like, oh, this is a slip opinion, and so then this is what gets initially issued versus the final opinion, and I can read through and just better be able to understand the legal mechanics of the case that they were making, which is part of what was really interesting is if you actually read through the decision, you see that there's a really good basis for why they decided that IEPA was not an appropriate way of implementing the tariffs. And they weren't saying that the president doesn't have authority at all to implement additional tariffs. They were saying IEPA is not the way that you do that. And there's a legislative history behind it to show that it was never intended to do that. And, they actually suggested alternative measures that the president could take to do it. And so then I think it's a really good opinion. It's well written. And I think it sets them up where I think that the plaintiffs are going to continue to be successful in the Court of Appeals.
So I guess it might be a good time to, just real quick, Andy, it might be a good time to also mention that you're acting nowadays, what you're doing is doing consulting, that's why you're actually seeing a lot of this going on right now, correct? Yeah.
I've been working with various importers and different companies, supporting them as they are reacting to the changes and just trying to beef up their compliance programs because a lot of people are worried about the enforcement environment, which there's definitely a trend of increasing enforcement. We've seen Department of Justice Attorney General Pam Bondi come out and say that trade enforcement is one of the priorities of her Department of Justice, and really looking at being able to name and shame more companies that are violating import and export regulations. And so on the export side, there have been a slew of OFAC settlements recently with some pretty major penalties in the hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars on the export side. And then on the import side, those aren't typically made public, but one of the things that I'm counseling companies on is that they can't rely on the fact that they will continue not to be made public, because definitely what we're seeing in enforcement is that they they want to name and shame companies. They want to publicize it because they want to deter others from trying to evade those duties, because that's really key to being able to meet the revenue goals that they have, which is where they're trying to offset all of the cuts that they're making on the tax side, bringing in less tax revenue by showing that they're bringing in additional billions of dollars in tariffs. But you can't do that if you're not enforcing it.
Before we go any further, I just wanted we mentioned IEPA, and what that is International Emergency Economic Powers Act. So it's, again, just trying to, there's some folks that may not fully appreciate some of the acronyms or things that we're doing.
We can make whole sentences out of acronyms.
Oh, I'm telling you. With the things that are going on, I mean, we were talking about this before off camera, is with the fundamentals of what you're trying to deal with right now is fundamentals being, do you have good paperwork, and you got right classifications, and you got good valuation, good country of origin, and all that. And you have a company should have, good processes in place. But before that, or not before, but in the midst of that, now we have these situations that are being created where the president's pushing for these reciprocal tariffs and trade talks and trade deals trying to be negotiated. It is, I guess, putting some things that have become urgent, if you will, almost like an emergency type situation. You've got a supply chain. You've got a company's got their factories in whatever countries. And now all of a sudden things are flipping in just almost overnight. And you've got your budget laid out, you got everything laid out. And then the next thing you know, everything's destroyed as far as a budget planning, because now you've got an extra 20, 30, 40, 50% tariffs on the very same goods you've been bringing in for a while. In that kind of scenario, if you have to have people in your company that are used to dealing with compliance, and now all of a sudden they're tied up in trying to keep up to date with all this information, what do you think has to happen to, the work doesn't just stop. So now all of a sudden they're tied and pulled away. You've got to either hire more staff or make sure your staff's proficient, but it's too late to be trying to train in the midst of things. I mean, would this be something that you recommend? What are the options for somebody to try and keep their sanity and keep their company going with their basic stuff while their experts are engaging in strategic plans and discussions with the upper management?
I think really part of what I advise companies to do in this situation is to lean on trusted service providers as partners in your compliance program. And so it's impossible for anyone to keep up with all of the changes that are going on. It's so much. It's so frequent. It changes from day to day, from week to week. That's a lot to keep up with while you're trying to do all of just the day-to-day work of supporting operations that trade compliance does. And so I think that it's really important right now for importers and exporters to have close relationships with their customs brokers and their freight forwarders, and to make sure that they are included on communications, that they're doing regular QBRs where they're talking about specifically the regulatory changes that are affecting their business and what their providers are recommending that they do, and then being able to communicate that back with other functions within the business. Trade compliance should be meeting very regularly with whether it's procurement or sourcing or supply chain, whatever that function's called in the organization. But those two should be joined at the hip right now, really talking about what is the strategy, short-term, medium-term, long-term, for how we're going to handle the supply chain for the organization in response to the changes that are happening right now. I think one of the worst things that companies can do right now is doing nothing. The companies that are just hunkering down and saying, I'm just going to wait and see what happens, that is not a good strategy, because it's going to continue to change. You are going to lose money in the meantime. You're going to be leaving potential savings on the table, and your competitors are going to pass you by because they're going to be taking action and doing things. And so it's really important to be able to do something and to have different plans in place and contingencies. I think one of the things that people are struggling with is, they're looking at, okay, well, if China's going to have, 145% tariffs or whatever the final number is going to be, then, okay, let's can we shift production to another Asian country that's also going to have kind of similar economics and efficiency of scale for us. But then, then you have Vietnam. It's like, oh, well, it's going to be, 20%, 25%, whatever it is on Vietnam now with a 40% transshipping tariff. We don't even know what that means. What does a 40% transshipping tariff mean, right? It's not clear yet. So then it's, okay, well, let's look at India, or let's look at Indonesia or Malaysia, but it's kind of a game of whack-a-mole, right? Because there's so many new tariffs coming up at any point. Well, then how can you plan around that? And so I think it has to be more of, short term, what can we do to mitigate our costs? But long term, where does our business really need to be, right? Let's assume that these tariffs aren't going away, because they likely are not. And so then what do we need to do to continue to be competitive in our market, knowing that the tariffs are there? And long term, what does that have to look like?
Lila, you hit on something that's excellent in that the sourcing or purchasing group need to be joined at the hip with the compliance side, and then transportation and logistics of your company. I mean, the executive leadership need to understand that as things are going, they should be meeting probably, every other day or at least weekly, and literally just start talking about different scenarios to plan that out.
Yeah, I think it's the difference between compliance being transactional versus strategic, right? And so then if you are in an organization where compliance is just very transactional, it's about this single shipment that I need to get out or in, right? Then that's an environment where you likely don't have collaboration between the different functions. Sourcing isn't telling trade compliance upfront that they want to look at changing from one country to another. And then they're finding out on the back end that, oh man, that wasn't really a good decision, right? So one of the things that I've seen is that a lot of companies are looking at, well, can I still have parts made in China, but then I'm going to ship them to Mexico and assemble them in an EMEX facility and then import them into the US under USMCA as a good made in Mexico. That sounds great in theory, but that may or may not avoid Section 301 duties or avoid additional tariffs, as a good of China. And that requires a pretty in-depth analysis that your trade compliance people are going to have to do for you. This isn't something where you can just, on the fly decide that, well, that's the best strategy, and so we're going to go with that. It's something where you really have to discuss it with them. The same with the relationship with the broker. Your relationship with your customs broker should not be transactional in nature. It shouldn't just be, I give you the shipment and you clear it and that's it. And you send me my bill. It needs to be one where it's a strategic relationship where you treat them as a partner who is helping to propel your business forward. And you have discussions about where your company is going, what risks you see, how you're mitigating those risks, what changes are happening in the organization, and how your broker can support you as you go through all of that.
Well, there was a discussion we had, or actually Anik had recently with Eric Smithwise, you know him, and a very sharp guy. And he gave a scenario that, to your point, in that there was an item that was assembled in China at a plant there. The key component that he gave said it was manufactured in Vietnam, so that when it went to China to be assembled with other parts, the essential character still was the same as the Vietnam component. So there was not a substantial transformation for that Vietnam item when it was assembled with other things. So then when it was coming in, the question is, was the country of origin now Vietnam, or is it China, or is it Vietnam with Chinese parts? It's like there's this big question mark as to what exactly is going to happen here. And the broker couldn't answer. I mean, everybody's like, we're still waiting on some of this. So that's, again, some of that strategic discussion, as you were saying, the different scenarios that you come up with, there's going to be homework, homework involved from some of the staff to go and maybe even reach out to the brokers or reach out to some experts and consultants. Here's a scenario. Here's what we're thinking. do your due diligence, do some homework, research it, and then come back. It may take you a couple of weeks to get all that information together to put forward and say, okay, here's a scenario. Here's what it's good. Here's, the pros and cons. But do you think that would be a good approach in coming up with some things just to have it ready before you pull the trigger on making decisions?
Yeah, actually, one of the points that I want to make with that is it's important for you to understand what's reasonable for you to ask of your broker versus when it's really consulting, right? So this is one thing that I see where sometimes importers can be overly reliant on their broker to do more compliance work for them than what their broker really should be doing in just a normal broker relationship. And some customs brokers also have a consulting side. That's especially the largest customs brokers, they tend to have a consulting side as well. But for the ordinary course of business of just acting as a broker, if you have a classification question about, I'm looking at this and I'm trying to decide between these two tariff codes for this item, that's a normal thing that a broker would answer you on. If you have a database of 10,000 items that you need tariff classifications for, that is consulting work. That is not something that your broker should or would probably be willing to do for you as just part of the brokerage operations. The same with country of origin analysis. If it really requires research and analysis and looking at customs rulings and going back and looking at 19 CFR 134.1 versus 120 versus these different rules, that's not the type of thing that you would just ask your broker to do for you as part of the ordinary course of business. That's really a consulting thing. And so then you can either engage, your broker's consulting arm, or you can engage other consultants like myself or others. There's lots of great consultants out there who can do that work for you to be able to do the analysis, do it in depth, answer questions that you have, and then give you the kind of report that you can rely on as evidence of reasonable care should you be questioned by customs later.
Lila, although this may sound like a little bit of a shameless plug or anything, but a lot of what you're talking about and a lot about what you're mentioning here, and I guess because I know you very well also, and I know you, when we talk at either ICPA or whatever, just whenever we're talking, but a lot of what you're saying here sounds to me resonates with what we've talked in the past about how if you have a standard, like an SOP, you would know when and if you should be reaching out to someone or how you can do that internally. But it all comes together if you do have that right trade compliance program, in my opinion. And I know you preach that a lot, in fact. And again, it might sound like a shameless plug, but I mean, it's a right. It falls in perfectly, like with your program that you teach here at Global Training Center, where you develop a trade compliance program that not only includes how you're going to build that program, but also an SOP, or I guess some people may call it an SOP, but it's really more like a trade compliance manual, be it an import, export, or both, or whatnot. But it sounds to me like having that, there will not be a question or any on how to move, regardless of what the trade situation is right now. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. If you have something solid, you're prepared to know, okay, well, something changed. there's a tariff. Pardon the pun, but there's a tariff shift here. But and I, now I need to pivot. Let's call it a pivot. I guess that's the best way. There's a trade
I'm totally
pivot.
stealing the pun of tariff shift. Yeah, there's a LinkedIn post coming for tariff shift as a pun.
Yes, but what do you think? Does it start with that, or am I like?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of the basics that are still really important right now. And if you don't already have the basics documented and in place for your trade compliance program, then I think then you are in a place where you're trying to manage all of the chaos of what's new going on, but then you're not going to be doing the most efficient work you could do for your day-to-day trade compliance operations if you don't have that standardized. And we mentioned enforcement. There's a lot more enforcement going on right now. You have Customs has hired something like 8,000 new agents that are going to be assisting conducting an enforcement for the new duties. They're going after importers who are trying to evade duties. You have enforcement on the export side where you've got new OFAC settlement agreements being announced. They're really looking for sanctions evasion, whether that's, by country or people who are dealing with denied parties or sanctioned parties. And so then in that kind of environment, one of your best defenses is that you have the basics, the fundamentals documented, that you have a compliance manual, you have basic compliance training, that your trade compliance staff have attended external training. That is how you're showing that you're doing due diligence, you're exercising reasonable care to be able to have the fundamentals in place of making an effort at being compliant. That's really important. I think it's also important because right now, a lot of people are getting a lot of misinformation about trade compliance at the same time, not from internally, but externally. So I've spoken with clients where, especially when the China tariffs were at, 145% plus for a little while there before they put that on pause, they had suppliers in China that they were talking to about being able to shift some of that production. And their suppliers were giving them bad information saying, well, I can ship to you DDP and you won't have to pay the tariffs, or, we can utilize the first sale rule and it's so easy and, and you can pay lower tariffs, or, we can just shift like packaging to Thailand and call it country of origin Thailand, all sorts of things that are not true, right? But that things that you need to be able to quickly and efficiently communicate in plain language why that's not an option. And so then that's part of what having those fundamentals in place helps you to be able to do, is to say, hey, you know what, we already looked at first sale for export and it's not a good, choice for us because we're purchasing directly from the manufacturer, or, no, packaging doesn't qualify to change the country of origin. Here are the things for our products that we would have to focus on, right? And being able to communicate that quickly and in terms that the other functions of the business are going to be able to understand. And so while it may seem kind of like you're sweeping the floors in a hurricane by going back and trying to do things like creating processes while there's so much change going on, really it's going to put you in a better position to be able to fight those fires as they're popping up if you've got the rest of your house in order.
Lila, the one thing too, as you're talking, is the people that are managing your compliance area for, to support the supply chain and whatnot. Upper management should be looking at things to say, look, they may have their budget, but there are additional requests that they're going to need, additional resources. When it could be consulting, could be bringing in some, maybe some third parties to do some of the fundamental compliance, reviewing your paperwork and getting that stuff done while, again, the leadership is engaged in strategic thoughts and things of that nature. So that would be something. Can you talk about that on how they, upper management should be looking and maybe even asking questions and going and checking out with the compliance side of things? You can imagine everybody's wanting to be informed, but that's a group that could be worked right down into the ground, kind of a thing.
Andy, I think that's a great question. And I think now is the time of year that's perfect to be talking about and preparing for those budget requests. Most companies, their fiscal years end December 31st. And so then their annual budget process usually kicks off somewhere around August, and they wrap that up in October to be able to have a final budget for the year that's coming, right? And so then it tends to be a longer process, but you have to already get your requests in early. You can't wait until October and then say, oh, wait, me. I need some money too, please, right? You need to be able to have those early. And so trade compliance departments should be talking with their leadership about what resources they need. So this is a great time to ask for things like extra money for consulting, like extra money for external training, looking at global trade management software. If you already have it, what can you do to upgrade it? Are there other modules that you can add? Are there other upgrades that you can do to make it more efficient? If you don't already have it, maybe you can get it, right? There's a lot of good business case to be made that you need more tools in your arsenal to manage the chaos that is global trade right now. And so now is a good time to really do that, but you got to have your justification and be ready to do that. So I think with that, made a lot of the key takeaways, from what I am advising importers and exporters of right now is that, the chaos is a feature and not a bug. It's not necessarily going to settle down anytime soon. And please don't have a wait and see strategy as an organization or as a trade compliance team. Really be thinking about what you need to do to support the organization through this short term, medium term, long term. Look at your fundamentals of trade compliance. Do you have a manual? Do you have training? When was the last time they were updated? What kind of support do you need on that? There's a lot of great resources to be able to support you. Make sure that you are focusing on key relationships, both internally and externally. You should be really focused on the relationship you have with logistics and with supply chain, procurement, sourcing, whatever you may call it in your organization. You guys should be talking on a really regular basis about what you're doing to mitigate the tariffs and to change the supply chain in response to that, and how trade compliance can help them to make the best decision possible. And really talking to your senior leadership about what resources you're going to need, whether that's additional personnel or consulting or training or software.
What Lila has said, if it has sparked your mind into thinking about several different things within your company, with your upper management, with executive management going through, don't let it just sit there. Take some action. Go back and listen to this show and go back and take your notes as you're going along and listening to it, because this is some great stuff. Lila, thank you so much. This is a great show. I think this is going to be one of our most listened for a while here, because everybody's going, oh, what do I do and keep up with this?
Well, thank you guys again so much for having me back on. It's been my pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you, Lila. Yeah, go ahead.
I will tell you, folks, I was just going to say thank you again for your listenership. There's been a lot of things going on. We've got some, today was a great show. I'm going to tell you, we also have some plans for some really cool shows coming up. I can't talk for some reason today. Okay. Sorry, Mara. Anyway, thank you for sharing our show, liking it. If you haven't subscribed to us, please hit that follow button or subscribe button so that we can continue to grow the show. And we thank you so much. Lalo, I'll tell you, you and your team have been phenomenal, and the show's doing great. But I'm looking forward to some future shows too, with some of the plans that we've been talking about.
Right. So, yeah, we have a few little surprises coming up as well with, some guest hosts and even a combination podcast that we're doing with, well, I'm not going to say with who, just tune in. It's going to be a really good show. So anyway, thank you all, and hope you all have a good day.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest in the show, or would like to sponsor Simply Trade, or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only, and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.